it's pretty likely that you've encountered an ad that has to do with mental health. Mental health is becoming increasingly important in our society, and thousands of people go to college every year to study psychology and psychiatry, trying to figure out why do we as humans feel the way that we do. But when it comes to solutions to our problems, how do we know that what psychology says is actually true? How do we know that the solutions they give us are something that's real and not something that's going to lead us down a bad path? I believe that the Bible is the only source of truth that we should use in counseling, and that it is not the mind that is the problem, but actually the heart that is the issue. Today, I want to look at two views of counseling, one biblical and one psychological. A very common argument in the psychology world is that you can actually mix the Bible and psychology together into one view. However, as we're going to look at, that does not exactly line up with what the Bible says. A man named Austin Collins, who is the co-author of Heath Lambert's book, A Call to Clarity, unpacks this argument when he says, "Many who claim the mantle of biblical counseling today assert that biblically faithful and effective counseling necessarily integrates and commends the use of extra-biblical psychological findings discovered due to common grace, provided they are scrutinized biblically." This psychological argument basically says that you can use the Bible to justify psychology, mingling the two together. However, Collins makes a rebuttal for the biblical side, which says, faithful biblical counselors will recognize that all secular systems only masquerade the truth and corrupt the Bible's God-centered epistemology. This argument, which is the biblical side, says that we should only use the Bible in counseling because it is God-inspired, which means there is going to be no errors in it, and it is the real source of truth for helping counselees with their heart issues. Another argument used by psychologists with the Bible is that the word psychology itself is actually used in the Bible, justifying the mix of the two. However, an unpacking of the Greek word psychology shows us differently. The word psychology, which is two compounds, psych, which means soul or mind, and logos, word or law, is not the same kind of Greek that we use today. So the New Testament word psychology is not the same kind as the modern word psychology, making that argument completely irrelevant for the mixing of psychology in the Bible, because it's not even the same word that we use today. On the contrary to these views, there are many psychologists who think that the Bible, much less religion, shouldn't be used in counseling at all. And this is a very popular view for most psychologists. This misconception is talked about by J.E. Adams in his book, Compassionate Counseling. And he says, in some circles, nouthetic or biblical counseling has gotten a bad rap. Its proponents have been characterized as callous, cold, austere, and legalistic. And that's exactly what psychologists want us to think. They want us to think that the Bible is just a rule book, and that if we follow it, we're not going to have any happiness. And it's the search for happiness that leads people down a bad path. Dr. Joachim Kruger writes an article on Psychology Today entitled Happiness Made Simple, Introducing Epicurus in 1,000 Words. For those of you not familiar with Epicurus, he's an ancient Greek philosopher who studied happiness in mankind. And Dr. Kruger very much agrees with Epicurus' philosophy on happiness. He writes, in antiquity as well as in the Christian era, organized religion was the enemy of Epicurus. Epicurus held the notion of supernatural gods were not only silly, but detrimental to happiness. Then and now, organized religion demands obedience and immoralizes human behavior. Both these endeavors are hostile to freedom and happiness. And it's views like these from Dr. Kruger and Epicurus that lead us down a bad path. They'll make us think that if we listen to God in the Bible, that we're going to be unhappy, that we're not going to be able to be free to make choices. However, the Bible shows us that when we obey God, we actually are happy. We actually go down a good path. Hebrews 12, 1-2 in the ESV says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." This verse tells us that it's actually endurance that makes us run the race of human life. It's not a simple fix. It's not that we just take a medical pill for a couple months and that solves what we're going through. It's not that we just go to a couple therapy sessions, as many psychologists encourage their counselees. It's that we look to Jesus, who is the founder and perfecter of our faith, and that is what brings us real happiness in this world. But if we believe the exact opposite, we are going to be running in the opposite direction, not only ourselves, but also leading our counselees away from God if we tell them that what psychology says is true. This is why it's so important for us to know that the Bible is the only source of truth that we should use in counseling. Today, we need to stay strong in our faith so that we don't conform to psychological counseling or even mix psychology and the Bible together into some kind of new truth. God did not create the Bible to need support from humans. It is something that is divinely authored by Him, and that makes it sufficient for all of our problems. It is of the utmost importance that we are led by God when we counsel others so that we can equip them with biblical truth for everyday problems.